Hi everyone, this is Dr. Hall. We're going to do the posterior mediastinum today, so some really interesting structures. So to start, you might want to take a few moments. We have a lot of little vessels and things to make. So I have a big vein started. I have my thoracic aorta, esophagus, my thoracic duct, my azygos vein, a couple of nerves, trachea with the bronchi, and a whole bunch of small arteries, veins, and nerves over to the side. So you might want to get those started before you begin, because there's just kind of a lot of them for this one. So I'm also going to warn you, I'm going to do some more structures than you need to do for your assignment, just for the educational value. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to move some of these things out of the way until we need them. So the most posterior structure that we're going to find is actually going to be our descending or thoracic aorta. So here's that aortic arch, right? So the aorta used to be, bring it a little bit more inferiorly here, right? It's curving like that candy cane over this way. And then it continues down very posteriorly down the thoracic cavity. And then it's going to enter into the abdominal cavity. The esophagus then will be anterior to the thoracic or descending aorta at its most inferior aspect, but it's going to actually be a little bit lateral and posterior, of course, to the arch. So let's now add in our trachea and our bronchi. That's going to be directly anterior to the esophagus. And then we have, of course, the aortic arch coming over this way. So the next structure we're going to add is a very posterior structure, which is the thoracic duct. Think of the thoracic duct like the vena cava of the lymphatic system. So this is receiving lymphatic fluid, lymph, from the whole body pretty much, and it's going to drain up superiorly. This is going to course behind the esophagus, and then we're going to see where it drains into the circulatory system superiorly in a little bit. Let me just adjust my camera so that I know we're going to be able to see that. Okay, so that's going to be a very posterior structure, just lateral to the esophagus. Just lateral to the thoracic duct, we're going to find our old friend, the azygos vein. So you probably remember the azygos vein is traveling posteriorly, and then it's going to curve around the root of the lung, right? So even all the pulmonary vessels here, like a candy cane, to empty into the superior vena cava. I don't know if I can get it to stay. Not really. All right, so we'll come back to that. The other posterior structure that we're going to add are the sympathetic chains. So the sympathetic chains are, as you would think, part of the sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight nervous system. And these are going to be located on the posterior thoracic wall. And coming off of them, we are going to find the intercostal nerves. So you'll remember that the intercostal nerves originate posteriorly and travel around in the intercostal space all the way around to the anterior thoracic wall. Put some on the other side as well. I'm not sure if I made enough nerves. Let me make a few more. So here we are in the posterior intercostal space, and of course we need some blood vessels as well. So we're going to have posterior intercostal arteries. So in the anterior thoracic wall, we had intercostal arteries that were coming off of the internal thoracic artery, but posteriorly we have separate arteries that are coming directly off the aorta, and of course traveling along with that intercostal nerve in the superior portion of the intercostal space. And these go posterior to all these other structures. Coming off the aorta, which is our most posterior structure, so it's posterior to everything else. So you have to kind of lift it up. Whoop, come on, thoracic duct, and get it back there. All right, we're also going to have posterior intercostal veins, and they are going to drain over into the azygos vein. It's going to go posteriorly here and right into the azygos vein here and there. And let's do another one here. This is posterior. The arteries are posterior. Okay, so we have our posterior intercostal arteries and veins, and then we have our intercostal nerves. So we don't say posterior because there's just one, and this one's going to curve all the way around to the anterior thoracic wall. All right, what do we have left? A few things, because we need to see where this thoracic duct is going. I also want to show you that there is an anterior vagal trunk. So an anterior vagal trunk is going to be a collection of these webby, we're going to have this anterior vagal plexus, which is this webby arrangement, assortment of a whole bunch of nerves on the anterior surface of the esophagus. And this is receiving its nerve fibers from our friends, the vagus nerves. So you remember the vagus nerves travel posterior to the root of the lung. Here it's coming along the aortic arch, right, on the left. And then it's going to give rise to the nerve fibers of the esophageal plexus on the anterior surface. Let me give us a vagus nerve on the left. Again, it's also going to be posterior to the root of the lung. Yes. There we go. I'm just going to drape that there for now because I'm going to add in some of the arteries to remind you of the relationship of the vagus nerve to the arteries. So coming off of the aortic arch, of course, we had the left common carotid, and the vagus nerve travels along with that, and here would be the left subclavian. So the vagus nerve is anterior to the left subclavian. On the right side, of course, we have the brachiocephalic trunk. I'm just making one right now. So that would be coming off up here, brachiocephalic trunk, which branches into the right common carotid and the right subclavian, and the vagus nerve would be here, right, anterior to the artery. So now we're ready to add our veins so that we can see where this thoracic duct is going to ultimately empty. So I am making I'm going to make them kind of flat so it's easier to put them on top of everything else. So I'm going to have my superior vena cava, into which my azygos vein is draining. And my brachiocephalic vein on the left, and my brachiocephalic vein on the right. Internal jugular on the right, and internal jugular, flatten that out, on the left. All right, so that runs with the carotid and the vagus. So that thoracic duct, which is bringing lymphatic fluid, traveled posteriorly to the esophagus, the arteries, comes around lateral to this left internal jugular, left vagus, left common carotid, and then it is going to come right at this juncture of the left subclavian vein and the left internal jugular vein, where they join to form the brachiocephalic vein, and that thoracic duct is going to dump its lymph right into the venous system there. So all that fluid then is going to drain with the venous blood through the brachiocephalic vein into the superior vena cava and into the right atrium of the heart, where it mixes with the blood. So I think we've hit all the structures, so let's do a review. So going from superficial to deep now. So again, we have the thoracic duct draining into the venous system at the junction of the left internal jugular and left subclavian as they come together to form the left brachiocephalic, then drain into the superior vena cava and the right atrium. For your reference, I also included the right internal jugular, right brachiocephalic vein, right subclavian vein. So I'm going to remove those so we can see what's underneath. Just reflect that. And so as we remove that, we could see that the azygos vein here was draining into the superior vena cava as well. Okay, so we have our left common carotid, left vagus nerve coming down along the aortic arch, posterior to the root of the lung, giving fibers to the esophageal plexus. Our right vagus nerve with the right common carotid traveling anterior to the subclavian artery, posterior to the root of the lung, and then gives fibers as well to that esophageal plexus, which is a web-like network of nerves. That then coalesces into the anterior vagal trunk. All right, let's see. What's the best way to see everything else? I think I'm going to remove the trachea and bronchi for us. I'm going to remove that. And so now we can see the esophagus, azygos vein, thoracic duct more inferiorly. And we can see that the posterior intercostal veins are draining into the azygos vein. The posterior intercostal arteries are coming off of the aorta. And the intercostal nerves are coming off of the sympathetic chains on each side. So that's our posterior mediastinum.